We begin with Vayigash, which we heard Marshall chanting beautifully earlier. And just to give a little context before we jump into the verses that I want to, or the verse I want to focus on, Vayigash starts in Genesis 44, verse 18, with Vayigash elav Yehuda. So Yehuda, Judah, is going to Yosef, and not knowing that Yosef is Yosef, still seeing him as this big guy in the house of Paro. So he gives a speech, and it goes from verse 18 through verse 34 in Genesis and Breshit 44. And it's for those familiar with the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which I will be quoting a little bit throughout this because, like others here at Beth Am, it's a big favorite of mine. So this is the speech. If you're familiar with the musical, this is the "Oh no, not he" speech. And the song goes on, "Oh no, not he, how you can accuse him is a mystery, save him, take me, Benjamin is straighter than the tall palm tree." And for all the droshing that Andrew Lloyd Webber does in the musical, these lines he gets pretty accurate, because what's happening in this speech is that Yehuda is saying to Yosef, please take me instead of Binyamin as a prisoner. And in those verses, the big thing that he's focusing on is how heartbreaking it will be for his father, which he still doesn't know it's also Yosef's father. During those verses, he says a derivation of the word father 14 times. He says Av, Aviv, Avinu, Avi, all kinds of derivations of the word father. So what comes next, which we'll read in the first 4 verses of Breshit 45, is that something happens to Yosef in hearing this speech of Yehuda. And he can no longer, as the English translation says, he can no longer control himself, and he has to reveal who he is to his brothers at that point. And it could be that those hearing about his father so many times is just like, he's so emotional at this point. He's thinking of his father Yaakov. It could be that seeing Yehuda, seeing one of his brothers being willing to think of how his father will feel and how his brother will feel, and being willing to sacrifice himself in place of his brother and for the feelings of his father could have moved him. So there's all kinds of reasons why we might think that this is the moment where Yosef says, okay, I have to reveal who I am. And then we get these verses. So I would love maybe if someone wants to read the 4 verses from Breshit, Genesis 45 in English, and then we'll focus in on verse 3 in Hebrew. But does someone want to read for us the 4 verses in English? Great, thank you. And if you're comfortable to, as many of you know here, if you're comfortable to pass the mic for the people on Zoom, those who are comfortable, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. 45:1, Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone withdraw from me." So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. His sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear, until the news reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still well?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dumbfounded were they on account of him. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come forward to me." And when they came forward, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt."
Thank you so much. So we'll see from that translation, just I didn't put the parsha is Vayigash, which comes from the first verse that we were looking at in the beginning of Yehuda's speech, Vayigash elav Yehuda. We get Vayigash again in the 4th verse, but I put, again, it's another lyric from the musical, "Joseph, Joseph, is it really you?" In Andrew Lloyd Webber's imaginings, this is what the brothers are thinking. Of course, we see in the verse when he says who he is, they are not able to say anything in that moment. I don't know. Oh. that's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. The rabbi said or the Pope said? The Pope said. So just to repeat, the Pope said. Okay. John Paul. Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. Just to repeat for the people on Zoom and that are listening, I just learned, I didn't know that, so thank you for sharing that, that Pope John Paul introduced himself to a rabbi. He visited a synagogue in Rome and introduced himself to the rabbi as, I am Joseph, to say, I am your brother. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Thank you. So with that, we are going to dive into a little bit of trying to understand what's going on, both from the perspective of Yosef in this verse and also what's going on with his brothers, what's their perspective. So in the third verse, we have the Hebrew, Vayomer Yosef el Echav, Ani Yosef, ha'od avi chai, ve'lo yachlu Echav la'anot oto, ki nivhalu mipanav. So we had our translation here in English is the JPS translation, and I wanted to look at a few other potential ways to translate in English this verse. I've highlighted the first part about Ani Yosef ha'od avi chai, but we are going to look at both parts of the verse. I just wanted to start with focusing on what Yosef says when he first reveals himself, and also the next verse that says, where he says, Ani Yosef achichem asher mechartem oti mitzrayma, I am your brother Yosef, who you sold to Egypt. That's what I might have thought would have been the first thing he said. But actually, before he says that, the first thing he says after he says Ani Yosef is Ha'od Avichai. So let's look at some of these English translations. Can I get, would someone be like, someone be willing to read the various English translations we have that have a little bit of a difference between Ha'od Avichai and the Nivhalu Mipanav? Oh, I think we have.
The first translation is by Everett Fox. Then Yosef said to his brothers, I am Yosef. Is my father still alive? But his brothers were not able to answer him, for they were confounded in his presence. Alters says, and Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed before him. The Common English Bible says, Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Is my father really still alive? His brothers couldn't respond because they were terrified before him. The New JPS. Joseph said to his brother, I am Joseph. Is my father still well? But his brothers could not answer him, so dumbfounded they were on account of him. And Spicer writes, Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still in good health? But his brothers were unable to reply, so dumbfounded were they at him.
Thank you. So I brought a couple commentaries, but before we look at the commentaries, I wanted to hear from you all two questions that I have. So the first question is based on those translations. I'm curious, based on, we've been going through this yet again this year, this Yosef story all the last couple of weeks. And based on what we know of Yosef from the last couple of weeks of Parshas and from what we've learned previously about Yosef, which of the translations do you think works best? And I also want you to think about in terms of, is Yosef asking about, is his Ha'od Avichai, is that like, is he physically okay? Is questions about his spirituality, or like, is he spiritually okay, mentally, emotionally? What is he getting at with this question? Is it like the literal, is my father alive, or is something else going on? So I have a list in the questions section about how you personally would translate the words Ha'od Avichai based on what we were just looking at, or maybe something else. A, is my father still well? B, is my father still alive? C, is my father still really alive? D, is father still in good health? E, all of the above. Maybe you think they're all different sides of the same coin, or you have some other reason that they all work. Or F, none of the above. And maybe you think none of these translations are getting at what Yosef's trying to get at, and maybe you have a different translation you might want to offer. So we could take a poll, or we could hear a couple comments and then maybe take a poll after.
Was mourning all alone
Mm-hmm.
for Joseph. He never stopped mourning
Mm-hmm.
all these years. How many years was it? 20?
It says somewhere, actually, maybe something like that. I don't remember exactly.
Mourning all alone.
Yeah. At this point, I think it also says, I don't remember these. I don't remember how old he is.
Joseph
Do you
is
remember?
30 when he stands before Pharaoh, and then there's 7 years of plenty. So we're already into the second year of the famine, right? So he's like 38, and it says, and then I guess the question is how old is
How old is Yaakov? Yeah.
So yeah, when Joseph is born, how old is he?
I don't remember, but he's definitely, significant amount of time has passed for sure.
I mean, he spends 20 years with Lavan, so he's got to be born.
We're trying to calculate how old Yaakov might be at this time. Old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He keeps talking about, I'm going to be going.
Right. Right.
But I was just trying to, I was trying to get some sense, because it all gets into, you told me he's alive, but like, what's his speed of being?
Right.
So
Right. Right. Thank you. So just to repeat for those who are listening, a couple of the things we're talking about is how much time has passed since this happened, how old is Yaakov, and is he talking about, what is Yaakov's state of being? So these are definitely things that I think about as well in this moment. Did I see one other hand before we take a, yeah? Yeah, yeah.
seeing them for the first time, and his father's old, like, I think it's shocking.
Yeah. But the part that concerns me with that, and because Judah has already been telling him that the stories about his father is alive, and then he comes back and asks this question. It's always troubled me,
Yeah.
because it didn't seem to make sense to me,
Right.
and that because of that, because he's being told he's alive, unless he thinks that his brothers are lying to him.
Well, he doesn't have a whole lot of reasons to trust him, does he?
Right. So just to repeat, thank you so much for those who are listening. Just to repeat that we're talking about whether the pshat, the literalist, simplest, straightforward meaning of "is my father actually alive?" seems to be speaking to some of us here, and then the question is, but does that make sense because of all the verses where Yehuda is talking about their father? And then the question to that is, but does Yosef really have the ability yet to trust his brothers? Yeah.
I also want to add something similar, that I think kind of the question that he's asking is a very emotional question, that it's not supposed to be eloquent or anything. It's just how is he? Is he doing okay?
Mhm.
And I know that, like, I was reading something online about how there's like what's the term for like a story? There's a midrash
Yeah.
about how Joseph was like constantly thinking about his father, and like had visions of his father, and kind of that really connects with the idea of like Joseph wanting to know if not just is he well, but more specifically, is he alive?
Yeah. So the literal, is he alive?
Yeah, to respond to that one point, there's a famous, when he is about to be seduced by Potiphar's wife, he sees the face of his father, and that prevents him from
wow.
succumbing to her temptations.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you. So
Funny, I grew up in Israel, and all we did is like reading the Torah, but that's it. We didn't even touch. While I'm out of Israel for a million years,
Yeah.
everybody is really analyzing the It's like that there are so many variations for the word father.
Yeah.
You know, father is one thing in contemporary conversational Hebrew.
Right.
Something totally different when you're reading the Torah.
Right.
It has variations.
Yeah.
That right there is
Yeah. Thank you. And we are going to look at that really shortly. The how of and avi is used in modern Hebrew and biblical Hebrew. And I love that. Thank you for noticing that. We definitely love to like take one word and dive deep into what does it mean. I'll take Stevie's comment, and then we will take a poll. Oh, and then also Marshall's, and then we'll take a poll on this, and then we'll look at some commentaries as well. So yeah. Would you want to pass it? Is that okay? Then never mind. Just kidding.
Immediately before this, the conversation that Judah is saying is that, right, if we leave without Benjamin, our father will die.
Right.
And so
Right.
on some level, Joseph's saying, like, have I saved him?
Mm.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So the question of if Yosef is asking, have I saved our father here? That's an interesting one. Thank you. Yeah.
This is sort of a musical question for you and for Rabbi Chorny.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have in the text, I'll sing the text as I can, I think I know what's happening in it. So here's the text as I read it. Vayomer Yosef el Echav Ani Yosef Ha'od Avi Chai Velo Yachlu Echav La'not Oto Ki Niphalu Mipanav.
Mm.
So the question is the following.
Mm-hmm.
Where he said Ani Yosef, we have the trope symbol of a katon.
Mm-hmm.
And do I understand correctly that a katon is less of a stop, less of a pause than a etnachta? So I think something's happening here in the text.
Right.
He says, Ani Yosef, his brothers are,
Right.
what happens at the end of the sentence?
Right.
Nifhalu, they were confounded or dismayed.
Right. Exactly.
And then he says, is my father still alive?
Yeah.
They haven't recovered yet.
Right.
What's happening?
Right. Thank you. I think actually, instead of taking a poll, I think you can all reflect on which translation you like. And I think I want to take that to move us to the next question, which is one of the parts of that question that I'm asking is whether you think those two parts, Ani Yosef and Ha'od Avichai, are one thought, or whether it's two separate thoughts. If he's saying Ani Yosef, and then he pauses for reaction, but the brothers aren't doing anything because they're in such shock. And then he says, Ha'od Avichai is the next thought. Or is it this connection, like you're pointing to the trope? And I love looking at the trope for clues. That's another way, looking at the trope for clues of how to understand it. I love doing that. And I think there is something there that he can't, maybe Yosef can't even wait for the brothers' reaction. Maybe he's just like, Ani Yosef Ha'od Avichai, like he has to get those words out. That's like what is on his mind. So thank you. And then just a few more parts of the question that you can reflect on before, and then we're just going to move into the commentary. So the question just that's connected to that is, before we look at the commentary, why do you think that these three words are the first words Yosef says after revealing who he is to his brothers? And this question of, are these three words part of revealing who he is to his brothers, or are they separate, the next thought? And what do you think might be behind these words? But I think we have been starting to unpack that, and I'm grateful for what we've been sharing so far. So I think I want us to move to see what Robert Alter says, and then we're going to look at the Kli Yakar, and they both look at this first part of Yosef's perspective, and then we'll take a little bit of time to look at the brother's perspective. So does someone want to read the Robert Alter commentary on Ani Yosef Ha'od Avichai? Would you like to? Okay, great. Can we pass the mic? Thank you.
I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? His very first utterance, after his sobs have subsided, is the essential revelation of identity, a two-word in the Hebrew, bombshell tossed at his brothers. He follows this by asking whether his father is still alive, as though he could not altogether trust the assurances they had given him about this when he questioned them in the guise of the Egyptian viceroy.
Mm-hmm.
His repeated reference to my father serves double duty. The first person singular possessive expresses his sense of personal connection with old Jacob. He is, after all, my father, he is saying to his brothers. But it is also the idiomatic usage for the familiar father in biblical Hebrew, as like Abba in Aramaic and later Hebrew.
Thank you. So first we get Robert Alter is backing up this question that came up in our discussion about whether Yosef can trust the assurances that they had given him when he's questioning them as the Egyptian viceroy. Are his brothers trustworthy is something coming up in the altar as well, so thank you. And then the question about the language, about Avi, that was brought up about how we look at in the biblical Hebrew or modern Hebrew, that Alter is saying that there is an idiomatic usage for the familiar father in biblical Hebrew. When you say Avi, it could be something similar to Abba. And in fact, one of the translations, I think the Spicer translation, translates it as not is my father still in good health, but is father still in good health with a capital F. So there's a couple different ways to understand this according to the altar, and I think we were touching on that in our conversation. So I also want us to look at the Kli Yakar, who is, his name was Shlomo Ephraim ben Aaron Lunshitz, and he lived in Prague from 1550 to 1619. And so that's, I just put another, again, that same verse we're focusing on, which has another slightly pretty similar but slightly different translation that says, and Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph, is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him because they were startled by his presence. So can I get someone to read number 1 under the is my father still alive Kli Yakar commentary? Oh, would you like one? Oh, oh, yeah, there's extras. Yeah, thank you. Would you be okay with a mic or? Oh, it's on where it says the Kli Yakar, and then it's 3:1. Oh, thank you. Are you okay with a mic? Thank you. Can we? Oh, wait, before you start, are you okay to use a mic?
No. Even though the brothers already told him that he was alive, as was understood from all of Judah's words, nevertheless, Joseph thought that perhaps they spoke thus so that he would take pity on the old man and not cause his death. Therefore, he asked at once again, is my father still alive?
Thank you.
It
Oh,
seems logical that one reason we repeat ourselves is for emphasis, because we think the first time around people didn't really pay attention, therefore we repeat ourselves. That seems logical.
right. And also maybe so this is like another version. It's another version of Joseph's perspective. Not that necessarily he didn't trust his brothers, but in this Kli Yakar explanation, it's maybe that there was a reason that Yehuda was bringing up their father so many times in that speech. He was maybe wanting him to take pity on him. And so maybe he's asking again, like, are we really sure? Ha'od Avichai. It's like a different, it's a different side of the same coin of Joseph's perspective. And then the next comment shifts us from focusing on the perspective of Yosef to what's going on in the perspective of the brothers. So would someone be willing to read that number 2 on the brothers' perspective? Or you can continue reading. Thank you.
Okay. But they did not perceive it thus, and thought that he, Joseph, didn't intend to ask if he was alive or not, but rather to remind them of their sin. Therefore he said, is my father still alive? Meaning that he, Jacob, was his father, not your father, because they did not take pity on his suffering as if he were not your father. They were therefore startled and unable to utter a word.
Thank you.
Yes, it's common when you're startled,
so-
you can't speak a word.
right.
You're sitting there, yeah.
Thank you.
that's common.
So if we're to understand the Ha'od Avichai as is my father still alive, it's a question of, is this to say, that Yosef is trying to say to the brothers, is my father still alive? Sort of to like harken back to the Seder language, my father, not your father, not our father, my father, because he's saying, maybe the brothers felt like he's saying, when you sold me into slavery, you weren't thinking about how this would affect our father. And we saw how hard Yaakov took it. So maybe Yosef is saying, you know, you might be thinking of our father now, but you certainly weren't thinking of our father then. So he's really my father because I always thought about him. Maybe that's what the brothers perceived was happening with the Ha'od Avi Chai. Maybe that's a Kliakar take on it. And then Rashi sort of is in a similar vein that just I'll read quickly the Nivhalu Mipanav. Rashi says Mipnei Habusha. They were ashamed. They were embarrassed. Maybe this did remind them. And what's funny to me is when you look at the next verse, verse 4, where Yosef says, Ani Yosef achichem asher mechartem oti mitzrayma. I'm your brother Yosef who you sold to Egypt. You would think that would be more of the like, that's the direct, that's the literal, the pshat, like, this is, I'm Yosef and here's what you did to me. This is a more subtle opening, and yet the brothers are so, they're, whether, however you want to translate it, they're shocked, they're dumbfounded, they're startled that the brothers don't speak to Yosef until verse 15. Yosef, like, when they don't say anything, then he speaks more, and then in verse 14 he hugs and cries with Binyamin, and then in verse 15 I believe he kisses the brothers, and then they're able to speak. And we don't get in the text what they say to him, but we do get that they are finally able to speak to him at that point. So there's just a few questions on the back with another little picture of the brothers from the Joseph musical. Just a few questions for reflection, and also if anyone on the Zoom wants to share any reactions, I'm just going to take us through these 3 questions, and maybe this is something we can reflect moving into the next week as we sit with the Parashat Vayigash. So my first question is whether the commentaries of Robert Alter and Kliakar that we looked at alter your understanding of the 3 words that Yosef uses after revealing who he is to his brothers, Ha'od Avichai. Or does it reinforce what we were thinking initially? And I heard a lot of what our initial thinking was in line with what they were saying. And I'm curious, maybe something to reflect on this week, of why you would think now that these are the first 3 words that immediately come after Yosef says the words Ani Yosef. So that's just a little bit of reflection on what's going on with Yosef, and a little bit of the reflection on what's going on with the brothers. What do we make of the words describing the brothers after Yosef's big reveal? V'lo yachlu echav la'anot oto ki nivhalu mipanav. His brothers could not answer him because they were startled by his presence. So just a little bit of, reflecting on that. We talked a little bit about how do Kliakar and Rashi help us understand this moment, and how you might describe this moment for the brothers and for Yosef, and that it takes a lot more verses and the hugging and the crying and the kissing before they can actually speak to one another, or before the brothers can then speak to Yosef, now knowing who he is. And then a third question, this is really just for reflection, is how do the words that we use affect our own relationships, familial and otherwise? This question of him is he saying Avi for a specific reason to really get at them, or is it a personal thing? Maybe it's a personal thing, but it maybe affected them in that way. And with the wisdom of the coming week's parasha, as distilled by the commentators and by us, how can we increase our mindfulness about the words we use in relationship to others and in describing our relationships to others?